When Snyder came in, he said, we've got to make hard decisions, shared sacrifice, bold moves to solve a budget deficit of $1.8 billion. Am I close?
Yeah.
Okay, so he comes in and he hits schools, municipalities, the elderly, urban food banks, and he comes up with about 1.7. Am I right? Is that close? I'm about to say that that money that was supposed to solve the budget deficit went right through the state of Michigan, went right through Lansing, and ended up as corporate tax breaks. How am I doing?
More than $2 billion.
Yeah.
More than $2 billion. Okay, so I had Representative Olson and I had Representative Ouimet in the room, and I pointed this out. You say you're solving the budget deficit by taking from the poor and the disadvantaged. It's supposed to solve the deficit. It doesn't. It passes through and ends up in the hands of corporate tax breaks and the wealthy. If they were drug dealers, they'd be under indictment for money laundering. And that's all it is. So they keep telling us they're doing it to create jobs. It'll trickle down. Trickle down has never worked and never will. But what's worse, they tell us that it's going to trickle down. Why it's trickling up? The smoke is getting a little too thick in the room. I'm getting ramped up again. I'm going to bring Steve up. This is Steve Norton, managing partner of Ocno Design. He's a fearless warrior for school funding. Fix anything I said that was wrong, Steve, would you please? Mr. Steve Norton, for school funding.
Thank you. I keep seeming to follow Britt just after he's gotten everyone all riled up. It's puts me in a difficult position. But one of the disadvantages of going after a number of other very able speakers is that a lot of the things that you were going to say have already been said. So I'm going to try and strike out in a slightly different direction. As Britt said, I'm owner, manager of a small business in Ann Arbor. I'm also an advocate for public education in the state of Michigan, for adequate and stable funding for public schools. And so I'm here speaking both as somebody who has worked on that a lot, but I'm also a parent of 2 children in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, and I like to think that I'm speaking for many of my fellow parents, both here and across the state. I want to, I guess, take a step back a little bit after everything that's been said, and start off maybe with a slightly broader perspective. I'm trained as a political scientist, and in another lifetime, I spent an awful lot of time looking at and analyzing the efforts to reform the economies of the East European nations that were emerging from authoritarian rule. And one of the things that struck me over and over again is that many of the people in those countries and most of the advisors who were advising them from the West had a deep distrust of the democratic process. And they felt that the people could not be trusted to do what they considered to be the right thing. And they encouraged policies and rules that would in fact limit the power in these newly democratic countries, limit the power of democracies. I thought that that was poor policy and poor advice then. I certainly believe that it's a bad law in the state of Michigan or in this country. I think that that kind of technocratic approach to believing that you have one answer and to enforcing it over the will of the people rather than engaging in leadership, rather than engaging in consultation or negotiation or any kind of collaboration with local communities and public and elected representatives of the people, that's not only ill-informed, but it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous to our state. It's dangerous to So back to the details. We've already talked about how this law, in contrast to the one that preceded it, gives emergency managers significantly greater power to change laws, to change systems, to sell property. Let me speak just a little bit to the question of what happens in public schools. As a parent and as a citizen, I am extremely concerned about the qualifications, the ability, the leadership ability, the concerns that my elected representatives on local school board and the administrators that they hire and appoint, that they will know what they're doing when they're running my children's schools, when they're setting the curriculum, when they're designing how education works in my community. And now we have a law that says because of a wide range of financial difficulties, some of which can simply be described as not meeting the demands of whatever review team has made in terms of a consent agreement. It's not just whether or not they're cooperative, it's whether they're able to meet it under whatever circumstances, that an emergency manager can come in and essentially run everything. And that presumption, the presumption that that emergency manager comes in with, is that the problem is mismanagement or malfeasance. Now the fact is this comes at the same time that our state government and the state legislature, both recently and over many years, have been systematically limiting the options of local governments, and in particular of local school districts, to find their own solutions to their own financial difficulties. More and more of the control is in the hands of the legislature, and yet the legislature, present company accepted, turns around. Yes. The legislature turns around and says, well, you're in financial difficulty, you must be doing something wrong.
Right.
And I'm not sure that the problem is at the local level. Yeah. In a lot of cases, and I'm not necessarily saying this is the case here in Michigan. I grew up in Indiana, which has had a similar history. Legislatures sometimes are tempted to write laws that they feel will express their deep needs, their ideological concerns, and make a statement to the populace. And if it's bad law, that's okay, we'll let the courts sort it out. I think that that's an absolutely ridiculous and damaging way of governing, and I think that it's about time that all of us start to act like grown-ups and write legislation that is actually practical and effective for the state of Michigan, and will allow us to solve our problems without violating some of the principles that we hold most dear. And if we can't count on our elected representatives to do that in session in Lansing, then, fortunately, Michigan gives us the opportunity as citizens to say we all as citizens can act in a legislative capacity and decide whether or not we want to keep this law. And I encourage everyone who's a parent, who's a citizen, anyone in the state of Michigan to think very hard about whether this law serves the interests of the people of the state of Michigan. And if you think, as I do, that it does not, then I encourage you to sign this petition and to work to make Michigan a better place that solves its problems in a sensible and legal and rational manner. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.